Right.
Ready when you are.
Hello and welcome to today's webinar brought to you by Fortra. We're going to talk today about how to protect your AIX servers from malware. We'll be your presenters today. My name's Sandi Moore, Principal Security Consultant with Fortra. Been working on the power systems for about 20 years now. And with me today is Mike Davidson. Mike, if you'll introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Sandy. Hi, everyone. My name's Mike. I've been working on power hardware for a very long time, starting as a trainee mainframe operator in 1987, and I've worked in IT operations my entire career.
A lot of experience here, Mike. I'm happy
Between the two of us, there's nothing we can't do.
Nope. And I think we're going to bring some good information today for everybody. All right, let's jump on in. A couple topics we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about the threats to the servers, why you should bother doing something about it. Power systems, of course, can't be infected, right? And then how are you going to combat this? I think it'll be a good conversation. So let's jump on in. Mike, why don't you share with us a little bit about what the threats are?
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, well, malware can come from and in a variety of attack vectors, things like farming, phishing, spear phishing, whaling, exploits, worms, trojans, spyware, adware. It's all very, there's a lot of it about, and it can be very, very confusing for people. But the key thing to remember is it's all about data, and data has value. All data has value. Organizations paid at least $457 million to ransomware gangs in 2022, which is a drop of 300 million, showing a sharp decline in payments, which is reassuring for us because that means that organizations are maturing in their recovery plans. And these ransomware threat actors, these ransomware gangs, they want to do a number of things with your data. They either want to sell it or release it onto the dark web. They want to hold you to ransom. So basically give us your money if you don't want your data, if you want it decrypting, if they've encrypted it in the first place, or not releasing if it's sensitive to the world. And finally, just because there are groups out there, especially with the war in Ukraine, and the in-destroyer malware is simply wiping out disks and data. Got to remember, anyone and anything is a target these days. It doesn't matter if you're a large Fortune 500 or you're a small school somewhere in the back end of nowhere. If they can get in and they can take your data or encrypt it, they will do so.
All right, why are they bothering? What do you think, Mike?
Well, first off, regulatory requirements. This is why we should bother. A lot of organizations are governed by things like the European Union General Data Protection Regulations, GDPR, PCI, Payment Card Industry, HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, and there's lots of different regulatory requirements that companies have to adhere to. Penalties for leaking your data or having your data stolen or released to the public can be very severe. And here's just a few of them. Government Service Centre in Sweden, $22,000. Bergen Municipality in Norway, 170,000 euros. Active Assurances in France, 180,000. Booking.com, we've all probably heard of those, $569,000. DSK Bank in Bulgaria, €500,000. Ticketmaster, a very well-known UK ticket seller, €1.4 million. Marriott Hotels, global organisation in the UK, they got fined €18.4 million.
That's some big
money.
Finally,
here's the biggest so far. British Airways, $23.9 million. And it's not all about loss of revenue, it's about loss of reputation, loss of stock value and things like that as well. So looking at some of the statistics from last year's security report, in 2022, 83% of organizations reported more than one data breach. Of these, 60% that led to increases in prices for their customers. because of those breaches. 19% of those breaches occurred due to stolen or compromised credentials. And credential breaches have the longest life cycle because threat actors will linger in a system with stolen credentials so they can gain the maximum value. Phishing came in at a close second at 16%. Of those breaches, 59% of those organizations don't employ zero trust, and they reckon it costs an additional $1 million per breach in costs when you don't employ zero trust within your environment. And 45% of those breaches occurred in cloud-based environments, whether they're private, public or hybrid. So the cloud is not as safe. Remember, they're just other people's computers. And it is a universal challenge from the 2022 findings. The percent increase in average total cost from 21 to 22 was 3%, which is down on previous years. And as I said earlier, it shows that people's cybersecurity plans are maturing. The average number of days to identify and contain a breach has decreased to 275. That is still a huge number from the point where we found that someone's got into our systems to the point where we've completely remediated it. It's nearly 3/4 of a year. And that's come down from 287 in 2021. 19%, as we said earlier, 90% of those breaches were caused by compromised credentials. And the average cost of a ransomware breach is going to be 4.1 million euros or $4.6 million. So it's a lot.
It's expensive.
Mm.
All right. So, of course, I think some of the folks in this audience here today might be thinking that power systems aren't going to be infected or impacted by this. What do you think, Mike?
Well, let's talk about that.
Don't we?
We both know, yes. Well, here's our lovely Power 10 server, brand new off the shelf. And on that, we know we can run IBM, we can run AIX, and we can run a couple of flavors of Linux. And all of those systems can share disks to the outside world that can be browsed from a Windows desktop. As you can see here on the left, I've got IFS shares for my IBM and NFS and Samba shares for my AIX and Linux systems. And also we can put data into and take data out of those machines via FTP or SFTP. And if we've got a read-write share to our Windows desktop, as we can see on the right-hand side of the screen, we can potentially open up those disks to having malware come across from the Windows servers. And whilst they can't actually execute, because if it's Windows, it's x86, it can't execute on the power chips, it can be stored there. And also, if ransomware infects the PC and it's a read-write disk to a mapped drive on either the IBM, AIX or Linux, it will encrypt the data on the power servers. And the screen example shown is a file that was encrypted on an IBM I just a month or so ago at one of our customers. But when we talk about AIX and Linux specifically, you might think, well, can we get viruses and malware that actually execute on those operating systems? Well, not necessarily viruses, but certainly malware. The eBri SSH malware is an open SSH backdoor used to keep control of servers and steal credentials. It has been out in the wild for over 10 years. This is not a new phenomena. CDawked is a HTTP backdoor which it runs in memory and uses a single modified HTTPD binary. It's used to redirect web traffic. And in 2014, that's like 9 years ago now, we found 25,000 Unix and Linux servers joined in a massive botnet that was sending out spam and malware using these two as a combination. So whilst we think traditionally viruses and ransomware infecting our machines and encrypting data, we don't only use malware for that, we can use it for other nefarious purposes, such as sending out spam and pushing out more malware to other systems. Pathbot is also something that can run on AIX and Linux. It's a Perl script used to send out spam, and OnIMICI, it's DNS redirection malware. So it can run on AIX and Linux. And previously we've called this typhoid Mary syndrome, where these power servers have acted as infection points for the rest of the network. Maybe we should now call it COVID Colin, as we are been living with COVID for the last 3 years. Some recent Linux threats. These vulnerabilities and IBMI threats, they're remediated by doing standard security hardenings. So it's important to keep your systems current, as in updated and patched. So we can look at a couple of real world studies here. This one is Hidden Wasp. It can interact with the local file system, upload and download files, and run scripts, run terminal commands. The development reason is unknown, and it's not the usual DDoS or mining malware. Evidence has shown in high probability that the malware is used in targeted attacks for victims who are already under the attacker's control or have gone through heavy reconnaissance. So those stolen credentials, someone's got into your system, and they might put Hidden Wasp in there to retain control of that machine without you knowing. DrovoRub, Russian-based Linux malware. It's used for targeted remote control, a bit like Hidden Wasp. It's a fully developed suite with the implant, the rootkit, a command and control server, and an FTP and port forwarding tool. And it persists through reboot as well. And finally, Lemon Duck, an amusing name, but it makes use of a port scanning module that searches for internet-connected Linux systems listening on TCP port 22. When it finds them, it launches an SSH brute force attack on those machines with a username of root and a hard-coded list of passwords. So it's important to never have a default password. And if the attack's successful, it downloads and executes malicious shell code. So ironically, it removes other attackers from a compromised device by getting rid of competing malware. It prevents new infections by patching the very vulnerability it used to gain access. So it's all very, very clever. And would you believe all of these Unix botnets, Trojans, viruses, worms, ransomware, and rootkits are all out in the wild and can run on Linux and potentially AIX as well. It's quite a list, isn't it, Sandy?
Yeah, it's impressive, and not impressive in a good way.
No, not at all.
So frustrating. And
you think of virus and malware being an x86 problem, a Windows problem. 35% of all malware being written now is targeted at Unix-based systems. And when I say Unix, I mean Unix like Solaris, and also Linux-based, because it all come from the same family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's maybe share some information on how someone can combat these threats that we've been talking about.
Yeah, sure. There are some practical steps we can take. And if we've got an outside threat, you may be familiar with this already. It's the Northrop Grumman Defense in-Depth FAN. It gives you a holistic view of layered cybersecurity defense frameworks. And there's a lot to consider, but it allows you to consider everything. And one of the important things, and antivirus and malware is at the heart of that under endpoint security, under content security. So that's something that you might want to consider. Other practical steps that we can take is dealing with known admin accounts. QSEC offer is the root equivalent on IBMI. We should disable both QSEC offer and root on AIX or on Linux. Okay, attackers know that root is going to be an account on the system. So they will target that to gain high level access. You might want to consider getting some PAM software, such as PowerTech Authority Broker or Box, for IBMI and for AIX and Linux. You can use sudo. It's free to use and implement. Highly recommend it. Usernames, don't use obvious usernames. M Davidson, S Moore, J Smith. You can compromise credentials by looking at people's security cards if you're visiting somewhere and it has been known, and you can make up a user account from those initials and surnames, and work on the principle of least privilege for everyone. And I'll underline this line here: developers do not need root access. They don't. Yeah, get some PAM software so they can elevate their rights when they need to. Too many times I've seen all object access on the IBMI and root level access on AIX. It's just, no, don't do it. Shut down and remove unnecessary services. So there's a multitude of services that are still shipped with IBMI, AIX and Linux that are inherently secure, and they're done for that reasons of backwards compatibility. And there's three that's common to all platforms: Trivial FTP, FTP and Telnet. Okay, they are all inherently insecure because they transmit passwords over the network using clear text. So if someone's got a password sniffer, or they're running some network sniffing software, such as SolarWinds on the network, then they will see user accounts and passwords. So please don't use them. Shut them down, disable them, or better still, remove them completely so they can't be started. And what you should do is you should implement SSH.
I actually had someone tell me once, Mike. I'm sorry. I just they didn't know what the service was being used for, so they were afraid to shut it down. And I said,
and that's it's a common thing. It's a common thread. So what you should do is check what services are running, and then educate yourself to see what is actually required. There's some other ones like NTalk and RTalk and RSHD, the remote shell daemon. They're also inherently insecure. So yeah, shut them down and use SSH. It's a good one-stop shop for replacing these services. And then if you are running services, then you should tighten the configuration of them. So SSH, there are settings you can do. For example, disabling root access, so no one can log in using SSH remotely using root. Okay, if you want to do that, you go to the console, okay, or you turn on the root access for the brief period you might need it. But then again, we all know we shouldn't be using root. Use sudo or some PAM software to elevate access. If we've got a running Apache or Tomcat, there are settings that we need to set in there. Network file sharing, NFS, job scheduling. Okay, the Center for Internet Security, cisecurity.org, have free benchmarks for all of these services, depending on whatever platform they're running on, and you can download them. It's free to join. They're a non-profit, so I definitely recommend downloading the benchmarks, reading up on them, and then setting your configuration. And then you can monitor that configuration with something like PowerTech Policy Minder for IBMI or PowerTech Security Auditor for Windows, AIX and Linux. Badly configured databases and HTTP servers are common entry points for data breaches. So ensuring that the configuration of those databases and web servers is correct and secure is one thing that you can do as well. I think it goes without saying, things about passwords these days. Define a strong password policy. Things like differences between old and new passwords, minimum number of lowercase, uppercase specials, etc., like that. On IBMI, let's work at key password level 2 or 3, or better still, let's look at pass phrases which can't be cracked using a brute force dictionary attack. Example of which is a pass phrase would be, "I love Manchester United." exclamation mark, because it's not a word, it is a sentence, it's a phrase, and it's not going to be, whilst you might have Manchester and United in a dictionary attack database, you're not going to have those words in that order. So that's why passphrases they're better for businesses, because they're easier to remember.
Definitely. Users are much more successful at remembering a passphrase that has meaning to them, but not to someone trying to hack their password.
Absolutely, got it in one. Even better, if we can start using an SSH key. We talked about SSH earlier. If you implement that, you can then use a key exchange, which only allows access to a system on the exchange of an encrypted key from an authorized device. So from your laptop to that server, or from a master server to another server. You might also want to consider two or multi-factor authentication, which means we need knowledge, something that only the user knows, such as a password, passphrase, or a PIN number, something you have in your possession, such as a security token, a software token, or a QR code, or inherent, which is something the user is, which is biometrics, fingerprints, face, voice, or iris recognition, and that makes systems a lot more secure. Looking at our user accounts, then we should be reviewing our user and group accounts regularly on all our systems. We should be locking out those that have not been used for a while. We might set a standard of 7 or 14 days so that those user accounts then don't become available for a brute force attack. Remember those 20% of credential thefts that cause data breach. And check object ownership regularly. Users shouldn't own objects on the systems, files, directories. It should be owned by a group account so that when we remove that user, those file permissions and object permissions aren't retained. We should monitor everything. Automate your monitoring and report by exception. So we only want to be reporting the stuff that we need to take action on. We can become blind if we get lots and lots of alerts from your monitoring software. Look at a SIEM solution, Event Manager, QRadar, Alert Logic, something like that. At the very minimum, you should be using some sort of syslog aggregation to monitor your systems and make sure you report on it and alert in a timely manner. The days of if it isn't broken, don't fix it are gone. We should patch our systems. There are security bulletins coming out from IBM every week depicting security vulnerabilities that are being found, not just in the operating system, but in things like OpenSSL, HTTP servers, WebSphere Liberty components. So it's really important that you plan. You plan to update your systems regularly. You do it frequently, and by doing that, it'll enable you to sleep well at night. Certainly was for me when I was an administrator. Can't stress the importance of backups and testing that you can recover. 54% of organizations recovering from a ransomware attack use reinstallation and restoration from backup to fix the problem. 23% of organizations with a disaster recovery plan don't test it. It's worth remembering the core reason for having a disaster recovery plan and to test it regularly is to arm yourself and your team with the confidence that digital continuity can be provided, minimizing disruption to the business. Regular testing of that plan proves it and proves that it works. It ensures that agreed recovery points and times continue to be achievable. So I can't stress this more highly. When I was working for a large Fortune 500 many years ago, we would go every single year to the IBM disaster recovery site at Warwick in the UK, load up our tapes, recover our system and prove that we could do it. And we'd also record the times so that we could had a good mean time to recovery for business management.
You know, too, I think, Mike, is that with the backups and recovery plan for a malware attack, ransomware attack is a little bit different than a hardware failure, too. So I think having multiple strategies it can be helpful as well.
Absolutely. I know of at least 2 IBM shops, customers who have had a malware attack on their IBM I and had to recover from tape because it absolutely obliterated their IFS.
Yep.
So it's no good just saying you've got backups and you've got tapes. How do you know the data on those tapes is good?
Yep.
And that's through testing. Some other things that customers might want to consider across the entire power range of IBM AIX and Linux. Review permissions to folders, directories and shares. If that's too big a task, then just start with if you've got net server shares on the IBM I or NFS and Samba shares on AIX and Linux, because they are known attack vectors, especially if they're read-write. And one thing we don't want to do is don't share the root folder ever. Okay. Once that configuration's reviewed, set it and monitor it. Make those net server shares read-only whenever possible. Please don't have them read-write unless that's absolutely necessary. Monitor your configuration for changes. On IBM I, you can set QPWFS server, the authorization list, to limit access to qsys.lib. On AIX, you may want to consider the implementation of trusted execution, or AIX-TE, and that refers to a collection of features that ship with the operating system, free to implement, that you use to verify the integrity of the system and implement advanced security policies, which together can be used to enhance the trust level of the complete system. And likewise for Linux, you can implement SoLinux, which is Security Enhanced Linux, which is an access control system that's built into the Linux kernel. It's used to enforce the resource policies that define what level of access users, programs and services have on a system. They're both quite a bit of work, but you should definitely consider those.
Some great information there, Mike.
And one last word really on people. Hire and retain your top talent and be kind to them. It's always nice to be kind to people, isn't it? Why? Well, known threat actors are actively recruiting. That the Lapsus ransomware group are putting out job adverts like this. They are looking for people who are disgruntled, and they want them to provide access, VPN or Citrix access into a networks. You will be paid if you would like. There's a lot of money in it. So be kind to your people is what I say.
Yikes.
And we can all play our part. First and foremost, don't pay ransoms. And there's a big increase in people not paying ransoms because the overall amount paid out has decreased significantly from previous years. It's far better to avert a ransomware attack by hardening your attack surfaces than have to deal with the aftermath for a start. But you don't need to pay ransoms, do you, right? Because we've got a backup and a DR plan that we've tested, haven't we? So the Japanese have a saying, is fix the problem, not the blame. Find out what's broken and fix it. So don't start looking for blame and looking for who's screwed up. Learn from the mistakes of others. Okay, if we start playing that blame game, then people won't want to report security incidents, and that could be potentially dangerous for us. So increase your vigilance, your security protocols, look at all those things that we've talked about already, and reduce those vulnerabilities. Prevention is far, far, far better than cure.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
Sorry, please carry on.
No, why should we be using native antivirus? That's just one of those things for prevention, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll talk about that. As we talked about, all data has our value. So using native antivirus, well, most antivirus solutions are designed for Windows x86 architecture. Okay, McAfee, Norton, they're going to run on a server that you're going to download the signatures to your local desktop and things like that, and you're going to scan those disks on your file systems. If we use a Windows antivirus solution on a server to scan our IBMI, AIX and Linux network file shares, our IFS on the IBMI, NFS, or even our file systems on AIX and Linux, which can be done. Okay, it's all got to go across the network. Yeah, we've got to have a persistent network connection with a access that's going to very high profile access that's going to give us all object or root profile to run those scans. We're going to have to open the network door with a read write share necessary to possibly to root. It's not going to give us real-time live scanning on the actual endpoint. So when somebody drops something on there, we're not going to necessarily pick up on that straight away. There's going to be no intelligence about when and what to scan. It's going to have heavy network bandwidth, and you're going to be moving files around. So there's also no operating system acknowledgement of an infection at the actual endpoint in the LPAR on the Power 10 server. So we recommend that we don't do that. Having antivirus on the actual endpoint means that it can run in real time, which means we can do real-time scanning. So when something is FTP'd or dropped onto a file share, we can scan it immediately, and we can pick up if there is any malware in there for Unix or Linux. We can also tell if it's an x86 virus. I have seen x86 viruses sitting in the IFS and on network file shares that have come across from Windows servers. So native AV it's important for all systems. As I said, studies have shown Linux malware and Unix alone accounts for more than 35% of all malware now. And the number of Linux malware variants have tripled over the past 3 years. We've got systems that have been compromised, sending public safety data to servers in Russia. We've got organizations having to pay out over $1 million in Bitcoin to get their servers back online. So it's going to introduce significant business impact. And those Linux and Unix servers can host and spread Windows x86 viruses like Typhoid Mary or COVID Colin, as we're calling it now. And they can, AIX and Unix and Linux can be directly infected by ransomware, crypto lockers, scripts, trojans, worms, and other types of malware that these threat actors are using out there in the wild. So we've got some additional resources there for you. There's the cisecurity.org website, NIST, American Government Organization for Standards, NCSC, the UK Government Organization for Standards. Come to us at Fortra. There's my Twitter handles there. Find me on LinkedIn if you want to chat about anything around power, operating system security, or malware avoidance.
This is fantastic, Mike. I think you've brought a lot of valuable information to everybody today. I think that it's definitely put some things into people's minds of what do I need to do and what's my next step. And I think it's important to be thinking the big picture and not dismiss a single operating system because of assumptions and common misperceptions.
For sure, Sandy. It's important, and if you're not doing anything at the moment, please just start with the basics and do something. The smaller we make the attack vector for these bad guys, the better it will be all round. Here's the 60-second elevator pitch. Fortra can help. We do have products that are of use. We've got the antivirus for all 3 power platforms. We've got an event manager for all 3 power platforms, security order and compliance monitor. The same thing, they can monitor your configuration once it's been set and report on it. We've got PAM software, we've got exit point, 2FA and encryption software as well.
Yeah, lots of different ways we can help, and we love to be able to help customers. So definitely encourage reaching out and working with us, give you some ideas, and it's always a place to start.
Absolutely.
Thank you for attending today. If you had any questions, please put those in the chat window and we'll be sure to answer those if we are short on time. So really appreciate your time, Mike, and your expertise. It's a pleasure to work with you again and look
Likewise, Sandy.
look forward to another one in the future.
For sure.
All right. Take care, everybody.